The snow had started falling 3 hours before sunset, and by the time the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Watsonville's only general store, Grace Gardner could no longer feel her fingers. She stepped down from the coach onto frozen mud, her threadbare dress doing nothing against the biting wind that swept down from the Santa Cruz Mountains. The other passengers hurried past her into the warmth of nearby buildings, but Grace stood there clutching her carpetbag, trying to remember why she had thought coming to California would solve anything. Her aunt's letter had promised work at the boarding house, a fresh start away from Boston, and the scandal that had destroyed her reputation. The letter had not mentioned that January in the mountains could bring weather cold enough to freeze a person solid. Grace's teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue. She tasted copper and tried to orient herself. The main street of Watsonville stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings that looked sturdy enough but offered no immediate shelter. She needed to find Maple Street, where her aunt's boarding house supposedly stood. The stage driver had already thrown down her trunk and climbed back onto his perch, clearly eager to reach the next town before dark. "Excuse me," Grace called up to him, her voice thin against the wind. "Could you tell me how to find Maple Street?" The driver pointed vaguely east. "3 streets down, turn left. Big white house with green shutters. Cannot miss it." Then he was gone, the stagecoach disappearing into the swirling snow, and Grace was alone on a street corner in a town she had never seen, wearing a dress meant for mild autumn weather, not this brutal cold. She had sold her winter coat in Denver to buy food when the journey took longer than expected. It had seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. Now, it felt like the final in a long series of mistakes that had brought her to this moment. Grace picked up her carpetbag with numb fingers and tried to lift her trunk. It was too heavy. She managed to drag it a few feet before her strength gave out. The cold was making her dizzy, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She needed to move, needed to get warm, but her body would not cooperate. Her legs trembled beneath her skirts. She did not hear the footsteps behind her, did not know anyone was there until a voice spoke, deep and rough as gravel. "You are going to freeze to death standing there." Grace spun around and immediately wished she had not moved so quickly. The dizziness intensified and she swayed on her feet. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she found herself looking up at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked the wind. His hair hung past his collar, dark brown shot through with hints of copper in the fading light. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see his eyes clearly, gray as the storm clouds overhead. His hands on her shoulders were massive, rough with calluses, but surprisingly gentle. He wore buckskin clothing that looked as if it had been made for someone smaller, and he had simply outgrown it, and a heavy bearskin coat that must have weighed 30 pounds. "I am fine," Grace said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "I just need to find Maple Street." The mountain man looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes taking in her thin dress, her bare arms, her blue-tinged lips. Then, without a word, he released her shoulders and shrugged out of his bearskin coat. "No," Grace protested, stepping back. "I cannot take your coat. You will freeze." He ignored her, draping the coat around her shoulders. It was so large it swallowed her completely, the hem dragging on the ground. The weight of it nearly knocked her over, but the warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Grace could not help the small sound of relief that escaped her throat. The coat still held the heat from his body, and it smelled of pine smoke and leather, and something wild she could not name. "I cannot take this," she said again, but her traitorous hands were already pulling the coat tighter around herself. "When should I return it to you?" The mountain man had already picked up her trunk, lifting it as if it weighed nothing. "Which boarding house?" "Mrs. Patterson's on Maple Street." He started walking, carrying her trunk under one arm. Grace hurried after him, clutching the coat around herself. Without it, the man wore only a wool shirt that strained across his chest and shoulders. The muscles in his back and arms flexed as he walked, clearly defined even through the fabric. He seemed completely unbothered by the cold, as if he had been carved from the mountains themselves and winter had no power over him. "You did not answer my question," Grace said, half running to keep up with his long strides. "About returning your coat." "Keep it," he said without looking back. "I cannot just keep it. This coat must be worth a fortune. Made it myself. Not worth anything to anyone but me." "Then why would you give it to a stranger?" He finally stopped and turned to look at her. Snowflakes caught in his beard and hair, melting against the warmth of his skin. "Because you were shivering without a coat, and I have been cold before. Cold enough to know what it does to a person." Something in his voice made Grace think he was not just talking about physical cold. Before she could respond, he was walking again, and she had to hurry to follow. They turned onto Maple Street, and Grace recognized the boarding house from her aunt's description. It was indeed a large white house with green shutters, though the paint was peeling and one of the shutters hung at an angle. The mountain man climbed the steps and set her trunk down by the door. Then he turned to leave. "Wait," Grace called. "At least tell me your name so I can thank you properly." He paused, his hand on the porch railing. "Asher Calloway. I am Grace Gardner, and I truly do not know how to thank you, Mr. Calloway. You may have saved my life." "Just Asher," he said. "And you do not owe me thanks. Welcome to Watsonville, Miss Gardner." Then he was gone, disappearing into the snow with the easy, silent movement of a man more comfortable in the wilderness than in town. Grace stood on the porch wrapped in his bearskin coat, watching until she could no longer see him. Only then did she knock on the door. Her Aunt Beatrice opened it, a small, round woman with Grace's same auburn hair gone mostly gray. "Grace, oh, my dear girl, you are here at last. Come in before you catch your death. Where on earth did you get that coat?" Grace stepped into the warmth of the boarding house, but she could not quite bring herself to take off the coat yet. "A man named Asher Calloway gave it to me. Do you know him?" Beatrice's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Mountain Asher, he gave you his coat. Gracious. That man barely speaks 2 words to anyone in town, and he certainly never parts with his belongings. You must have made quite an impression." "I did not do anything. I was just cold and he happened to walk by." "Well." Beatrice ushered her further inside, closing the door against the wind. "That is Mountain Asher for you. He has a reputation as a hermit, lives up in the mountains most of the time, only comes to town for supplies once a month or so. Used to be a trapper, though I hear he does more hunting than trapping these days. Sells meat and furs to the mercantile. The children are terrified of him, think he is some kind of wild man, but I have never heard of him causing trouble for anyone." Grace finally removed the coat, holding it carefully. It was beautiful work, the hide expertly tanned and stitched together with sinew. The fur lining was thick and soft. Hours of labor had gone into making this coat, maybe weeks, and he had just given it to her without hesitation. "I need to return this to him," she said. "Good luck finding him," Beatrice replied. "Like I said, he only comes to town when he needs something. Could be weeks before you see him again. Now come, let me show you your room and you can tell me all about your journey. Are you hungry?" "Of course you are. When did you last eat?" Grace let herself be led deeper into the boarding house, but her mind stayed on the mountain man with the gray eyes who had given a stranger his coat and asked for nothing in return. The boarding house had 6 rooms for rent, and Beatrice ran it with the help of a young Chinese cook named Ming, who made the best dumplings Grace had ever tasted. Grace's room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the street and a quilt on the bed that Beatrice had made herself. It was more than Grace had hoped for, better than she deserved after everything that had happened in Boston. Beatrice did not ask about the scandal, and Grace was grateful. Her aunt knew the basics from letters. Grace had been engaged to a banker's son named Richard, a respectable match that would have secured her future. Then Richard's business partner had embezzled money, and Richard had blamed Grace's father, who had been an investor. The accusation was false, but the scandal had been enough to destroy the engagement and Grace's reputation. Richard had married someone else within 3 months. Grace's father had died of a heart attack shortly after, and her mother had followed 6 months later, worn down by grief and shame. Grace had nothing left in Boston but memories and accusatory stares, so when her aunt's letter arrived offering work and a chance to start over, she had packed everything she owned and bought a ticket west. "The work is not glamorous," Beatrice warned over dinner that first night. "You will be cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, changing linens. The boarders are mostly miners and ranch hands, decent men for the most part but rough around the edges. You will need to be firm with them sometimes." "I can do that," Grace said. She had managed her father's household after her mother's death, had negotiated with tradesmen and dealt with difficult servants. She could handle rough miners. "Good, you start tomorrow. For now, get some rest. You look exhausted." Grace was exhausted, bone-deep weary from weeks of travel and grief and uncertainty. But when she climbed into bed that night, wrapped in Beatrice's quilt, she found herself thinking not of everything she had lost, but of a mountain man who had given her his coat without asking for anything in return. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Grace woke before sunrise to help Ming prepare breakfast for the boarders. There were 5 men currently staying at the house: 2 miners working a claim up in the hills, 2 ranch hands from a spread north of town, and an older gentleman who was the school teacher. They were polite enough when Grace served them eggs and biscuits, though the miners stared openly, and one of the ranch hands made what was probably meant to be a charming comment about the boarding house's new attraction. "That is enough, Tom," Beatrice said firmly. "Miss Gardner is my niece and will be treated with respect in this house." Tom had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes, madam," meant no disrespect. After breakfast, Grace tackled the mountain of laundry that Beatrice had been letting pile up. The work was hard and her hands were soon raw from the lye soap, but she welcomed it. Physical labor gave her something to focus on besides the thoughts that wanted to spiral into darkness. She scrubbed sheets and shirts and hung them to dry near the stove, then started on the pile of mending that had accumulated. She was halfway through sewing a button onto one of the schoolteacher's shirts when she remembered the bearskin coat hanging in her room. She needed to find a way to return it to Asher Calloway. "Aunt Beatrice," she said that evening after the supper dishes were washed and put away. "How would I go about finding Mr. Calloway's cabin?" Beatrice looked up from her knitting. "You would not. Those mountains are dangerous if you do not know what you are doing, and Asher's place is hours from town even if you knew the way. Besides, there are wolves and mountain lions up there, and the snow is probably waist deep by now. You will just have to wait until he comes to town again." "But that could be weeks. I cannot keep his coat that long." "I expect he knew that when he gave it to you, dear. If he wanted it back, he would have said so." Grace frowned. "It does not feel right keeping something so valuable. Then think of it as a loan. You can return it when you see him next. In the meantime, you should probably use it. I noticed you do not have a proper winter coat." Grace did not have any kind of coat, but she did not want to burden her aunt with that information. "I will pay you back for room and board as soon as I can." "Nonsense. You are family and you are working for your keep. Now stop worrying about that coat and tell me what you thought of Ming's chicken tonight. I think he used a new spice." 3 weeks passed before Grace saw Asher Calloway again. She fell into the rhythm of the boarding house, learning the quirks of its occupants. The schoolteacher, Mr. Amos, liked his coffee strong and his eggs soft-boiled. The miners, Jake and Samuel, ate like horses and tracked mud everywhere, but always thanked her politely for meals. The ranch hands, Tom and his friend Carl, left early each morning and came back late, usually too tired for much conversation. Grace wrote letters in the evenings, mostly to friends back in Boston who never wrote back. She helped Beatrice with accounts and discovered her aunt was terrible at arithmetic. Grace reorganized the books and found several billing errors that, once corrected, put an extra $20 in the boarding house's coffers. "You are a godsend," Beatrice declared. "I have been letting Johnson at the Mercantile overcharge me for months." Grace also explored Watsonville, getting to know the town. It was small, maybe 500 people, supported by the nearby ranches and the mining operations in the hills. There was a main street with a general store, a mercantile, a blacksmith, a doctor's office, a church, and 2 saloons. Side streets branched off with houses and smaller businesses. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and Grace felt the weight of curious stares wherever she went. She wore Asher's coat when she went out. It was impractical, far too large and heavy, but it was the warmest thing she owned. She tried to keep it clean and undamaged, thinking of it as borrowed rather than given. Sometimes she caught the faint scent of pine smoke from the fur and thought of the mountain man who had given it to her without hesitation. On the 23rd day after her arrival, Grace was walking back from the mercantile with a bag of flour when she saw him. Asher Calloway stood outside the general store, loading supplies onto a pack mule. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and broad and powerful, his long hair tied back with a leather cord. He wore a different coat now, this one made of elk hide, not quite as heavy as the bearskin but still substantial. As Grace watched, he hefted a 50-pound sack of grain and slung it over the mule's back as if it weighed nothing. Grace's heart did an odd little skip in her chest. She told herself it was just surprise at seeing him again, nothing more. She crossed the street clutching her flour. "Mr. Calloway," she called. "Asher." He turned, and for a moment something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. Then his expression settled back into neutral stillness. "Miss Gardner, I am glad I ran into you. I have been wanting to return your coat, but my aunt said you live too far out for me to find you. Your aunt was right. You should not try to come up the mountain." "Well, here you are in town, so I can return it now. It is back at the boarding house. If you wait here, I can run and get it." "No need." Grace frowned. "What do you mean, no need? It is your coat. You must want it back. Told you to keep it." "But I cannot just keep it. It is too valuable, and you made it yourself. It must mean something to you." Asher finished securing the grain sack and turned to face her fully. Up close, Grace could see the small details she had missed that first night. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression indicated, the impossible breadth of his shoulders straining against his shirt. He looked like something out of a legend, like the heroes in the adventure novels Grace had read as a girl. "It means more knowing someone needed it," he said finally. "Besides, I made another one. In 3 weeks, I had the materials." Grace did not know what to say to that. She shifted the flour bag to her other hip. "At least let me pay you for it then. I do not have much, but I can save up." "No, Mr. Calloway." Asher Asher then, please be reasonable. I cannot accept such an expensive gift from a stranger. We are not strangers. I know your name, you know mine. That makes us acquaintances at least. Was he teasing her? Grace could not tell. His expression remained serious, but there was something in his eyes that might have been humor. Acquaintances do not usually give each other gifts worth a month's wages. Maybe they should. Definitely teasing. Grace felt her own lips twitch with the urge to smile. You are being deliberately difficult. I have been accused of worse. I am sure you have. This time he definitely smiled. Just a small curve of his lips beneath his beard, but it transformed his whole face. He looked younger when he smiled, less like a rough mountain hermit and more like a man who understood joy. Grace found herself staring and had to force her gaze away. Look, Asher said, his voice gentler. You needed a coat. I had one to spare. That is all there is to it. No debt, no obligation. Just one person helping another. Can you accept that? Grace wanted to argue further, but something in his tone stopped her. This mattered to him, she realized. Not the coat itself, but the act of giving it freely without expectation of return. She did not understand why, but she could respect it. All right, she said. But if you ever need anything at all, I hope you will let me help you in return, to balance the scales. I will keep that in mind. He turned back to his mule, checking the straps one more time. How are you settling in? Beatrice treating you well? Very well. She is wonderful and the work is good, much better than Boston. What brought you out here from Boston? The question was casual, but Grace tensed anyway. Family trouble. I needed a fresh start. Asher nodded, asking no further questions. Grace appreciated that more than she could say. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, then Asher said, I should head out. Want to make it back before dark? Of course. Thank you again for the coat, I mean it. You probably saved my life that night. Probably, he agreed, so matter-of-factly that Grace had to laugh. The sound surprised them both. Grace could not remember the last time she had laughed, really laughed. Asher looked at her with an expression she could not decipher, something warm and a little wondering. You should do that more often, he said quietly. Then he was leading his mule away, heading toward the edge of town and the mountains beyond. Grace watched him go, her flower forgotten, until he disappeared from view. February arrived with more snow and temperatures cold enough to freeze the water in the wash basin overnight. Grace spent her days cooking and cleaning and mending, falling into bed exhausted each night. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Boston had never been. There, she had been decorative, a piece in her father's business dealings, valued for her appearance and her ability to make pleasant conversation. Here, her hands produced tangible results. Clean sheets, mended clothes, hearty meals. It felt real in a way nothing had felt real in a long time. The boarders became less like strangers and more like difficult brothers. Jake and Samuel taught her how to play poker and lost all their spare change to her when they discovered she was very good at keeping a straight face. Tom apologized for his forwardness the first day and proved to be a decent man underneath the rough exterior. Mr. Amos shared books from his small library and discussed philosophy with her in the evenings. Even Carl, the quietest of the bunch, started leaving small gifts on the kitchen table. A ribbon from the mercantile, a pretty rock from the river, a carving he had made of a bird. You need to discourage him, Beatrice said, eyeing the growing collection of gifts. Carl is a sweet boy, but he is clearly developing feelings. I have been polite but distant, Grace replied. I do not want to hurt him, but I have no romantic interest in him. No romantic interest in anyone. Beatrice asked, her tone carefully casual. Not even a certain mountain man who gave you his coat? Grace felt her cheeks heat. I barely know Mr. Calloway. Asher, Beatrice corrected. And you think about him. I have seen you staring off into the distance wearing that coat of his. I am not staring off into the distance. I am usually looking at something specific. Hum. Grace threw a dish towel at her aunt, who dodged it with a laugh. But later, alone in her room, Grace had to admit Beatrice was not entirely wrong. She did think about Asher Calloway more than was probably warranted given their brief acquaintance. She wondered what his life was like up in the mountains, alone, except for whatever animals he hunted. She wondered what had driven him to become a hermit, because surely no one chose that kind of isolation without a reason. She wondered if he ever got lonely. She also wondered when she would see him again. A month passed, then 6 weeks. Grace began to worry that something had happened to him. The mountains were dangerous, especially in winter. What if he had been attacked by a bear or fallen through ice or simply gotten lost in a blizzard? He is fine, Beatrice assured her. Mountain Asher knows those hills better than anyone. He has survived 10 winters up there, probably more. He will come to town when he needs supplies. But Grace could not quite shake her worry. She found herself watching the street, looking for his tall figure. She started taking walks in the afternoon, telling herself she just needed fresh air, but somehow always ending up near the general store where she had last seen him. On the first day of March, her vigilance was rewarded. Grace was walking back from the post office, where she had mailed yet another letter to Boston that would probably go unanswered, when she heard shouting from the direction of the saloon. This was not particularly unusual. The Silver Dollar Saloon was where the miners and ranch hands went to blow off steam, and things sometimes got rowdy. But this sounded different, angrier. Grace hurried toward the commotion and found a crowd gathered outside the saloon. She pushed through to the front and saw Asher Calloway standing in the middle of the street, facing down 3 men she did not recognize. One of them, a thick-necked man with a red face, was shouting, "I said you owe me money, you mountain trash. You sold me rotten meat." Asher's voice was calm by comparison, but it carried easily. "The meat was fresh when I sold it to you last month. If it went bad, that is your fault for not preserving it properly. You calling me a liar? I am saying you do not know how to smoke meat." The red-faced man lunged forward, but his friends grabbed his arms, holding him back. "I will kill you, Calloway. Nobody calls me stupid." "Nobody called you stupid," Asher said patiently. "I said you do not know how to smoke meat. Those are different things." Grace almost laughed at the distinction, but the situation was too tense. The red-faced man was still struggling against his friends, and a crowd was gathering. This kind of confrontation could turn violent quickly. Without thinking, Grace stepped forward. "Asher," she called. "There you are. I have been looking for you everywhere." Asher's eyes found her in the crowd, and something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe. "Miss Gardner, this is not a good time." "Actually, it is a perfect time. I have that thing you asked me to hold for you." She pushed past the red-faced man and his friends, ignoring their protests, and grabbed Asher's arm. His muscles tensed under her hand, hard as iron. "We should go get it now before I forget where I put it." "Grace," Asher said quietly, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "You should not be here." "Neither should you, arguing in the middle of the street. Come on." For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then he nodded once and let her tug him away from the confrontation. Behind them, the red-faced man shouted something obscene, but his friends were already dragging him back toward the saloon. Grace and Asher walked in silence until they reached the boarding house. Only then did Grace release his arm. Her hand tingled where she had touched him. "Thank you," Asher said. "That was about to get ugly. Would you have fought them, 3 against 1, if I had to?" "And you think you could have won?" He shrugged, a movement that made his shoulders roll like a landslide. Probably, but fighting is messy and someone always gets hurt. Better to avoid it when possible. Grace studied him in the afternoon light. He looked tired, she realized. There were shadows under his eyes, and his clothes, while clean, showed signs of hard wear. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "I eat." "That is not what I asked." "This morning." "Had some dried venison and hardtack." "That is not a proper meal. Come inside. Ming made stew and there is plenty left." "I should get back." "Asher Calloway, you just faced down 3 angry men and I think you are afraid of coming inside for stew." His lips twitched. "I am not afraid. I just do not want to impose. You gave me a coat worth more than everything I own. The least I can do is feed you stew. Now come on before I decide to defend your honor against those men myself." This time he did smile, full and genuine. "All right. But only because I am afraid you would actually do it." Beatrice raised her eyebrows when Grace led Asher into the kitchen, but she said nothing, just pulled out an extra bowl. Ming ladled stew into it, adding extra bread and butter. Asher sat at the small kitchen table, dwarfing the chair, and ate with the single-minded focus of someone who was genuinely hungry. Grace sat across from him, nursing a cup of tea. "That man who confronted you, do you know him?" Asher nodded, swallowing. "Gus Henry. He has a claim up north. Bought some elk meat from me in January, said it would last him through the winter. He must have done something wrong when he tried to preserve it. Will he cause more trouble? Maybe. Gus has a temper, but he is mostly bluster. His friends will calm him down. If he does not calm down, you should tell the sheriff." "There is no sheriff in Watsonville. Nearest law is in Salinas, 30 miles away." Grace frowned. "How is that safe?" "It is not, particularly. But most people here are decent enough, and the ones who are not usually move on quickly. Towns like this are not for everyone." "Is that why you live in the mountains? Because people are not for you?" The question came out more blunt than Grace had intended, but Asher did not seem offended. He set down his spoon and considered her thoughtfully. "Partly. I grew up in a city, Philadelphia. Too many people, too much noise, never felt right. When I was 18, I headed west and kept going until I found a place that felt like home. That place was the mountains. Do you not get lonely sometimes? But lonely in the mountains is better than lonely in a crowd." Grace understood that more than she wanted to admit. She had been surrounded by people in Boston, had attended parties and social events almost every week. She had never felt more alone. "What about you?" Asher asked. "What are you running from?" "Who says I am running? No one comes to California from Boston just for a change of scenery. Not a young woman alone, anyway." Grace looked down at her tea. She could refuse to answer, could tell him it was none of his business. But he had been honest with her, and something about Asher made her want to be honest in return. "I was engaged," she said finally, "to a man named Richard. His business partner embezzled money, and Richard blamed my father, who was an investor. The accusation was false, but it was enough to create a scandal. Richard broke our engagement and married someone else. My father had a heart attack from the stress, and my mother just gave up after he died. I had no money, no family left except my aunt, and no reputation to speak of. So yes, I suppose I am running. Or maybe I am just trying to find a place where no one knows about any of that, where I can be someone other than the disgraced daughter of a dead man." She looked up and found Asher watching her with an expression that was neither pity nor judgment, just understanding. "Sounds like this Richard was a fool. Because he broke the engagement. Because he chose his pride over you." Something warm unfurled in Grace's chest. "You do not even know me. Maybe I am terrible. You stepped between me and 3 angry men to prevent a fight. You cannot be that terrible. I might have just wanted to preserve the peace. You were worried about me. It was not a question. I could see it in your face." Grace felt her cheeks heat again. Of course I was worried. You are my friend. The word hung in the air between them. Friend. It felt inadequate for whatever this was, this strange connection that had formed between a disgraced Boston socialite and a mountain hermit. But it was a start. Your friend, Asher repeated as if testing the word. Then he smiled, slow and warm. All right, then as your friend I should tell you something. What? That coat looks better on you than it ever looked on me. Grace laughed, surprised and delighted. That is the worst lie I have ever heard. Not a lie, truth. He stood, carrying his empty bowl to the wash basin. Thank you for the stew and for earlier. You are leaving already, you just got here. Sun will be setting soon, I need to get back. Grace wanted to protest, to find some reason to make him stay longer, but she had no right. They were friends, barely that. She had no claim on his time. When will you be in town again? Couple weeks, maybe. Depends on how the hunting goes. Will you come by when you do, for another meal? He paused at the door, looking back at her. You want me to? Yes, Grace said simply. I do. Then I will. He tipped his head in a goodbye gesture. Stay safe, Grace Gardner. You too, Asher Calloway. After he left, Grace stood in the kitchen for a long time, her tea gone cold in her hands. Beatrice came in and found her there. Well, her aunt said, that was interesting. It was just stew. It was more than stew, and you know it. Beatrice put a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. Be careful, dear. Mountain Asher is a good man from what I hear, but he is not an easy man. That kind of life he leads, the solitude, it changes a person. I know. I am not expecting anything. We are just friends. Hum, Beatrice said again, in that knowing tone that made Grace want to throw another dish towel at her. But later, alone in her room, wrapped in the bearskin coat that still smelled faintly of pine smoke, Grace had to admit that friend felt like a lie. She did not know what she felt for Asher Calloway, but it was becoming something more than friendship, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing muddy streets and the brown grass underneath. The days grew longer, and the temperature climbed above freezing more often than not. Grace started seeing wildflowers on her walks, tiny purple blooms that pushed up through the remaining snow with stubborn determination. Asher came to town twice more in March, and both times he stopped at the boarding house. The first visit, he brought a rabbit he had caught, already cleaned and dressed. For dinner, he said, handing it to Beatrice, to thank you for the hospitality. The second visit, he showed up with a deep cut on his forearm, blood soaking through the makeshift bandage he had wrapped around it. Grace nearly dropped the laundry basket when she saw him. What happened? Argument with a mountain lion, I won, but it got a swipe in. Grace dragged him inside to the kitchen and made him sit down while she got hot water and clean cloth. The cut was deep but clean, and Grace worked carefully to clean and bind it properly. Her hands were steady even though her heart was racing. The thought of Asher fighting a mountain lion, of how easily he could have been killed, made her feel sick. You need to be more careful, she said, tying off the bandage. It was the cat or me. I chose me. I am serious, Asher. What if it had gotten your throat instead of your arm? He looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened. Would you have missed me? Of course I would have missed you, you idiot. You are my friend. There was that word again, friend. It felt more and more like a lie every time Grace said it. Asher reached up with his good hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough with calluses but impossibly gentle. I will be more careful, he promised. Grace could not breathe. They were so close, and his hand was still near her face, and she wanted nothing more than to lean into his touch. But she forced herself to step back to break the moment. Good, because I do not want to hear about you getting killed by a mountain lion, or a bear, or anything else. Yes, madam. There was amusement in his voice, but also something else, something that made Grace's pulse quicken. After that, Asher started coming to town every week. He always had a reason: supplies to buy, furs to sell, meat to trade. But he always stopped at the boarding house, and he always stayed for a meal. Grace started making his favorites, though she would never admit that was what she was doing. Beef stew with extra vegetables, cornbread with honey, apple pie when the mercantile had apples. They talked about everything and nothing. Asher told her about growing up in Philadelphia, the son of a blacksmith who had wanted him to take over the trade. "I tried," he said. "Spent 2 years working the forge, hated every minute, felt like I was suffocating." Grace told him about her childhood in Boston, the endless lessons in deportment and dancing, the pressure to be perfect. "I was never allowed to just be," she said. "Everything was about appearances, about what other people would think. Even my engagement to Richard was more about business connections than love." "Did you love him?" Asher asked. Grace considered the question carefully. "I do not think I did. I thought I was supposed to, and I convinced myself I did. But when he broke things off, I was more relieved than heartbroken. Does that make me a terrible person? No, it makes you honest." As the weeks passed, Grace realized she was falling in love with Asher Calloway. It crept up on her slowly in small moments. The way he always took off his hat when he came inside. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. The way he smiled at her, those rare, full smiles that transformed his serious face. The way he made her feel safe, protected, valued. She was falling in love, and it terrified her, because what future could they possibly have? Asher was a mountain man, a hermit who had chosen solitude over society. Grace was a woman trying to rebuild her life, to find her place in the world. Their worlds did not align. They could not align. But her heart did not care about logic. April arrived with warmer weather and longer days. The mountains turned green, and the wildflowers bloomed in earnest. Grace started helping Beatrice in the garden, planting vegetables and herbs. The physical work was satisfying, and she liked seeing the results of her labor. Neat rows of green shoots pushing up through the soil. One afternoon, Asher showed up at the boarding house with a proposition. "There is a meadow up in the mountains that should be covered in wildflowers right now. Prettiest thing you will ever see. I thought maybe you would like to see it." Grace stared at him. "You want to take me up into the mountains?" "Only if you want to go. It is a few hours' ride, but the trail is easy this time of year. We could make it there and back before dark." Grace knew she should say no. It was improper going off alone with a man, even one she trusted. But the thought of seeing the mountains, of spending a whole day with Asher, was too tempting to resist. "Yes," she said. "I would love to go." Beatrice was less enthusiastic. "Grace, I do not think that is a good idea. It will be fine. Asher will keep me safe." "That is not what I am worried about." Grace knew what her aunt meant. She was worried about Grace's heart, about the inevitable hurt that would come from loving a man who lived in the mountains and probably had no intention of changing that. But Grace had already made up her mind. "I will be back before dark," she promised. The next morning, Asher arrived with 2 horses, a huge buckskin gelding for himself and a smaller gray mare for Grace. "Her name is Daisy," he said. "She is gentle, good with nervous riders." "I am not a nervous rider," Grace protested, then immediately proved herself a liar by nearly falling off when Daisy shifted beneath her. Asher caught her with one hand, steadying her in the saddle. "Of course not. My mistake." They rode out of town, heading east toward the mountains. The trail was narrow but well-maintained, winding through pine forests that smelled of sap and earth. Birds sang in the trees, and Grace saw a deer watching them from a thicket, its ears twitching. "Tell me about the meadow," Grace said as they rode. "It is a natural clearing about halfway up the mountain. Gets good sun most of the day, and there is a spring that feeds it. Every spring, wildflowers bloom there. Lupines, Indian paintbrush, California poppies, dozens of others I do not know the names of. Looks like someone spilled paint across the ground. How did you find it?" "I was hunting deer and tracked one up there. The deer got away, but I found the meadow. I go there sometimes when I need to think." They rode in companionable silence for a while, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner and cooler, but Grace felt warm in her bearskin coat. She would never admit how much she loved wearing it, how it made her feel connected to Asher even when they were apart. After 3 hours of steady riding, Asher turned off the main trail onto what looked like a deer path. "Almost there," he said. 5 minutes later they emerged from the trees and Grace gasped. The meadow stretched before them, easily 5 acres of open grass and wildflowers. Asher had not exaggerated. It looked like someone had spilled every color imaginable across the ground. Purple lupines swayed in the breeze next to orange paintbrush and golden poppies. Pink columbines clustered near white daisies. Butterflies danced between the blooms and bees hummed contentedly. "It is beautiful," Grace breathed. Asher dismounted and came to help her down from Daisy. His hands spanned her waist easily, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. For a moment they stood close, his hands still on her waist, her hands on his shoulders. Grace looked up at him and saw her own feelings reflected in his gray eyes. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "There is a good spot to sit by the spring." They spent the afternoon in the meadow. Asher had brought food, simple fare of bread and cheese and dried apples, and they ate sitting by the spring. Grace picked wildflowers and wove them into a crown that she tried to put on Asher's head. He tolerated it with the patience of a saint, though he looked ridiculous with lupines sticking out of his long hair. "You look very handsome," Grace said, trying not to laugh. "You are a terrible liar." "I am an excellent liar. I convinced all of Boston society I was a proper lady for 23 years. 23, I would have guessed younger. Is that a compliment or an insult?" Observation. He pulled the flower crown off his head and settled it on hers instead. "Better." Grace felt her breath catch. The way he was looking at her, the tenderness in his expression, made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. "Asher, Grace, I need to tell you something." He took her hands in his, those big rough hands that could kill a mountain lion but touched her like she was made of glass. "I am not good with words, never have been. But these past few months, getting to know you, it has been the best part of my life. You are the best part of my life. And I know I am just a mountain hermit with nothing to offer, but I was hoping maybe you could love me anyway." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "You think you have nothing to offer? Asher, you gave me your coat when I was freezing. You have been kind to me when I had no reason to expect kindness. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. How can you think that is nothing?" "Grace, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been trying not to because I did not think we could have a future together, but I love you. I love your terrible jokes and your rare smiles and the way you are gentle even though you are the strongest person I have ever met. I love you, Asher Calloway." For a long moment, Asher just stared at her. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was Grace's first real kiss. Richard had given her chaste pecks on the cheek, proper and bloodless. This was nothing like that. Asher kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, deep and desperate and full of yearning. Grace kissed him back with everything she had, all the love and longing she had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asher pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," What? Marry me? I know I am asking a lot. I know my life is not easy, and I live in the middle of nowhere, and I am not good at being around people. But I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Marry me, Grace. Grace wanted to say yes immediately, but reality intruded. Asher, I cannot ask you to change your life for me. The mountains are your home. You are my home, he said simply. Wherever you are, that is home. If you want to stay in town, I will stay in town. If you want to go back to Boston, I will go to Boston. I do not care where we are as long as we are together. You would hate living in town. You said yourself it makes you feel suffocated. And I said lonely in the mountains is better than lonely in a crowd, but I would not be lonely with you. I could be happy anywhere with you. Grace felt tears spill over, running down her cheeks. I do not want you to give up the mountains. I want to see where you live to be part of your life there. Could we do that? Could we make a life together in the mountains? Asher's smile was brighter than the sun. Are you sure? It is hard living up there, cold in the winter, isolated year-round. You would have to learn to hunt and trap and preserve food. There are no parties or social events or anything you are used to. I never liked parties anyway, and I am stronger than I look. I have been doing hard work at the boarding house and I like it. I like feeling useful. I think I could be happy in the mountains as long as you are there with me. Then yes, Asher said. Yes, we will make a life together in the mountains, but Grace, I still want to marry you properly with a preacher and everything. Will you marry me? Yes, Grace said, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and hope. Around them, the wildflowers swayed in the breeze, and Grace thought she had never been happier in her entire life. They rode back to town as the sun was setting, holding hands whenever the trail was wide enough for the horses to walk side by side. Grace could not stop smiling, and Asher looked lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When they reached the boarding house, Beatrice took one look at their faces and shook her head. I knew this would happen. We are getting married, Grace announced. Of course you are. But Beatrice was smiling. She pulled Grace into a hug. I am happy for you, dear, truly. Asher is a good man, even if he is completely wrong for you. He is completely right for me, Grace corrected. Same thing. Beatrice turned to Asher. You take care of her, you hear me? If you hurt her, I will come up that mountain and make you regret it. Yes, madam, Asher said solemnly. I will protect her with my life. See that you do. They planned the wedding for the first week of May, giving Grace time to make a dress and Asher time to prepare the cabin for a second occupant. He came to town 3 times a week now, and each visit he brought news of his progress. He was adding a room to the cabin, building new furniture, making improvements to the storage shed. He was also teaching Grace the skills she would need for mountain living. First thing you need to learn is how to shoot, he said one afternoon. They were on the edge of town, far enough from houses that the gunfire would not disturb anyone. Asher had brought his rifle, a beautiful weapon that he had clearly maintained with great care. I have never shot a gun, Grace admitted. I know. That is why I am teaching you. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger smoothly. Do not jerk it. Steady pressure. Grace's first shot went wide, missing the target completely. Her second shot was closer. By her 10th shot, she hit the edge of the target, and by her 20th, she hit the center. You are a natural, Asher said, pride clear in his voice. Or I have a good teacher. He also taught her how to track animals, how to read signs in the dirt and predict where game would be. He taught her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to start a fire with flint and steel, how to preserve meat and tan hides. Grace absorbed it all like a sponge, eager to learn everything about the life she was choosing. She also taught him things. How to dance, which he was terrible at but tried anyway. How to play chess, which he picked up quickly and soon was beating her regularly. How to read, because it turned out Asher had never learned properly and was embarrassed by it. Never seemed important, he said. Most of what I need to know I learned by doing. But think of all the books you are missing, Grace said. All the stories and ideas. Let me teach you. It will be fun. It was fun, actually. They spent evenings at the boarding house with Grace teaching Asher his letters and simple words. He struggled at first, frustrated by his own lack of knowledge, but Grace was patient. She found books with simple language and interesting subjects, and slowly Asher began to improve. I want to be able to read to our children someday, he admitted one night. If we have children. When we have children, Grace corrected. I want at least three. Is that too many? No. Asher smiled that rare full smile. 3 sounds perfect. The wedding took place on a bright May morning at the small church in Watsonville. The preacher was a traveling minister who came through town once a month, and he agreed to perform the ceremony. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Beatrice had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers from the meadow where Asher had proposed. Asher wore his best buckskin clothing, cleaned and mended, and he had even trimmed his beard. The whole boarding house attended the wedding, along with half the town. Grace was surprised by how many people came, people she had only met in passing. The schoolteacher, Mr. Amos, was there, and Ming with his wife and children. The miners, Jake and Samuel, stood in the back, grinning. Even Tom and Carl came, though Carl looked a little sad. Beatrice stood as Grace's witness, and the blacksmith, a man named John who was apparently one of Asher's few friends, stood as his. The ceremony was short and simple, the words traditional. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Asher did so with such tender enthusiasm that someone in the back whistled. Grace did not care. She was married. To Asher. She was Grace Calloway now, and it felt right in a way her life had never felt right before. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the boarding house. Beatrice had made a cake, and Ming had cooked enough food to feed everyone twice over. People laughed and talked and offered congratulations. Grace tried to talk to everyone to thank them for coming, but she kept getting distracted by her husband. Her husband. The word felt strange and wonderful. As the sun began to set, Asher pulled her aside. "We should go. I want to get to the cabin before full dark." Grace nodded. She had already said her goodbyes to Beatrice, had packed her few belongings onto the pack mule. She was wearing the bearskin coat, because even in May the mountain nights were cold. She was ready. They rode up into the mountains as twilight fell, following the trails Grace had started to learn. She was nervous, she realized. Not about marrying Asher, never about that, but about leaving the boarding house, the life she had built in Watsonville. It felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. "Having second thoughts?" Asher asked, reading her expression. "No, just first-time nerves." "We can stay in town if you want. I meant what I said about making a life wherever you are happy." "I am happy with you," Grace said firmly. "Town or mountains, it does not matter. You are my home now." They reached the cabin as the first stars appeared overhead. It was larger than Grace had expected, a solid structure of logs and stone with a real chimney. Asher had added a covered porch and enlarged the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney and light glowed in the windows. "Did you leave a fire burning?" Grace asked. "No. John said he would come up and get it started for us, so the cabin would be warm when we arrived." It was a kind gesture, and Grace made a mental note to thank John properly. Asher helped her down from Daisy and led her to the door. "Welcome home," he said, and carried her over the threshold. The inside of the cabin was beautiful. One large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A new addition held a bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot, covered in furs and blankets. There was also a small loft above the main room that could serve as storage or a future child's room. Everything was clean and well made, every surface showing Asher's careful attention. "You built all this?" Grace asked, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Most of it." John helped with the bedroom addition. "It is wonderful." Asher looked relieved. "I was worried you would find it too primitive." "Asher, I slept in a room the size of a closet at the boarding house. This is a palace." Grace set down her bag and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you for working so hard to make this ready for us. You are worth it." He kissed the top of her head. "Are you hungry? I could make something." "Actually, I was thinking we could start our marriage properly." Grace felt her cheeks heat, but she pressed on. "Unless you are too tired from the ride." Asher's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. "I am not tired," he said, his voice rough. "Not even a little bit." He swept her up in his arms, carrying her to the bedroom, and Grace laughed with pure joy. This was her life now. This man, this cabin, these mountains. It was nothing like what she had planned when she left Boston, nothing like the life she thought she wanted. It was better. The next weeks were a period of adjustment as Grace learned to live in the mountains. The days started early, before dawn, with Asher checking his trap lines while Grace prepared breakfast. She learned to cook on the open hearth, to manage the fire so it provided steady heat without burning the food. She learned to fetch water from the spring, to split kindling, to mend clothes with sinew when thread ran out. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the boarding house. Her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she had never felt more alive. Asher was a patient teacher, showing her again and again how to do things until she got them right. He taught her to skin rabbits and squirrels, to tan hides properly so they stayed soft and supple. He taught her to identify animal tracks, to move quietly through the forest, to shoot accurately even when she was cold and tired. "You are getting good at this," he said one day as Grace successfully brought down a deer at 30 yards. "Better than I was at this stage." "I have a good teacher," Grace replied, echoing her earlier words. But she was proud of herself too. She was becoming capable, self-sufficient. She was becoming a mountain woman. They fell into a rhythm, their days structured around the needs of survival but also filled with moments of joy. Morning coffee sipped on the porch while watching the sunrise. Afternoon walks to check the trap lines, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Evening meals eaten by firelight, followed by quiet time when Grace would read aloud and Asher would practice his letters. At night, they would retire to their bedroom, and Asher would make love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He was always careful with her, aware of his own strength, treating her like she was precious. Grace had never known physical intimacy could be like this, full of love and laughter and connection. 1 month into their marriage, Grace woke to find Asher already awake, watching her in the early morning light. "What are you thinking?" she asked sleepily. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "You gave up everything to be here with me. Comfort, society, easy living. I still cannot believe you chose this life." "I did not give up anything," Grace said, cupping his bearded cheek. "I traded a life I hated for a life I love." "That is not a sacrifice. That is a gift." Summer arrived, and with it came longer days and warmer weather. Asher took Grace deeper into the mountains, showing her his favorite places. A waterfall that fell into a crystal-clear pool, perfect for swimming on hot days. A grove of ancient redwoods that made Grace feel tiny and awed. A rocky outcrop that provided a view of the valley below, where they could see Watsonville as a small cluster of buildings in the distance. They made love in the meadow where Asher had proposed, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong. Grace had never felt so free, so completely herself. In Boston, she had always been performing, always aware of eyes watching and judging. Here, there was no one to judge. She could be wild and joyful and messy and real. They went to town once a month for supplies, and each visit reminded Grace of how much her life had changed. The boarding house felt crowded and noisy after the quiet of the mountains. The constant presence of other people exhausted her. She found herself eager to leave, to get back to the cabin and the solitude she now craved as much as Asher did. "I understand now," she told him on the ride home after one visit. "Why you chose this life. It is not about hating people. It is about loving the peace." "Exactly," Asher said, looking pleased that she understood. "Most people do not get that distinction." In July, Grace realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and her breasts were tender, and she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. She told Asher one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. "A baby," he repeated, his eyes wide. "We are going to have a baby. Yes, probably sometime in February if I am calculating right." Asher let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. He picked Grace up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he said again, as if he could not quite believe it. "Are you happy?" "Happy, Grace, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared, but yes, I am happy." The pregnancy changed things. Asher became even more protective, insisting Grace rest more and work less. She protested, but secretly she was grateful. The exhaustion was overwhelming, especially in the first months. She slept more than she was awake, it seemed, and Asher took over most of the chores without complaint. As fall arrived and her belly began to swell, Grace started to worry about the birth. They were hours from town, hours from any doctor. What if something went wrong? What if she died in childbirth like so many women did? "I am scared," she admitted to Asher one night. "I know. I am scared too." He pulled her close, his hand resting on her rounded stomach. "But we will get through this, together. And when the time comes, we will go to town. Beatrice said she would help, and there is a midwife there. You will not be alone, promise, I promise. I will keep you safe, Grace, you and our baby. That is my job now, and I take it seriously." As winter approached, they made preparations. Asher stocked extra firewood and food. He repaired the cabin, sealing every crack against the cold. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters to hurt tender baby skin. Grace sewed baby clothes from soft rabbit fur and knitted blankets. They were as ready as they could be. In January, when Grace was 8 months along and heavy with child, they moved to town. Asher rented a room at the boarding house, and Beatrice fussed over Grace like a mother hen. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, examined Grace and pronounced everything normal. "The baby should come soon," she said. "Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. First babies like to take their time." The baby came on a frigid February night during a snowstorm. Grace's water broke just after dinner, and the pains started soon after. They were bad, worse than she had imagined, wave after wave of agony that made her cry out. Asher held her hand through all of it, his face pale but his grip steady. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "So strong, just a little longer, Mrs." Chen was calm and efficient, directing Grace when to push and when to rest. Beatrice provided cold cloths and words of encouragement, and Asher never left, staying by Grace's side even when Mrs. Chen suggested he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. "I am staying," he said firmly. "She is my wife, and I am not leaving her." After 6 hours of labor as dawn was breaking, Grace gave birth to a son. He came out screaming, his face red and his fists waving, and Grace fell in love instantly. "He is perfect," Asher breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Grace, he is perfect." Mrs. Chen cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Grace's arms. He had downy dark hair and gray eyes like his father. He was beautiful. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. "You choose," Asher said. "You did all the hard work." Grace thought for a moment, then smiled. Garrett Calloway. It means brave and strong like his father." "Garrett," Asher repeated, trying out the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Garrett Calloway." They stayed in town for 2 weeks after the birth, giving Grace time to recover. Beatrice helped with the baby, teaching Grace how to nurse and swaddle and soothe. Asher was completely besotted with his son, holding him for hours and staring at him with wonder. "I cannot believe we made this," he said one night, watching Garrett sleep. "Something this perfect." "He is pretty perfect," Grace agreed. She was exhausted and sore and happier than she had ever been. "Do you think we can do this? Raise a child in the mountains? We can do anything together," Asher said. "Besides, what better place for a boy to grow up than surrounded by nature? He will have room to run and explore. He will be free like we are." When Garrett was 2 weeks old, they returned to the cabin. It was strange having a baby in the mountains, far from doctors and help, but it was also wonderful. Garrett thrived in the clean mountain air, growing bigger and stronger every day. He was a happy baby, rarely fussing, content to watch the world with his serious gray eyes. Grace fell into a new rhythm, one that revolved around Garrett's needs, nursing him, changing him, playing with him. Asher helped with everything, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Garrett when he was fussy. He was a natural father, patient and loving and gentle. As spring arrived and Garrett grew from newborn to infant, Grace realized she had everything she had ever wanted. Not the life she had planned, not the life Boston society would approve of, but her life. A life full of love and purpose and wild beauty. 1 year after their wedding, Grace and Asher returned to the meadow with Garrett. He was 4 months old now, chubby and giggly, fascinated by everything. They spread a blanket on the ground and let him lie there, watching butterflies dance overhead. "You remember last year?" Grace asked. "When you proposed here, of course. Best decision I ever made. I was so scared. I thought we could not possibly make it work, that our lives were too different. And now I know I was wrong. We make it work because we love each other, because we choose each other every day, because home is not a place, it is a person. You are my home, Asher, you and Garrett." Asher pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and passion she had come to expect from him. Garrett made a happy gurgling sound, as if approving of his parents' affection. "I love you, Grace Calloway," Asher said. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too. Now and always." 2 years later, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Gemma. She had Grace's auburn hair and Asher's gray eyes, and she was as fierce as her brother was calm. Where Garrett had been an easy baby, Gemma screamed her displeasure at the slightest provocation. But she was also affectionate and curious, and Grace loved her with the same fierce intensity. Garrett adored his little sister, always wanting to hold her and play with her. At 2 years old, he was already showing signs of his father's size, tall and strong for his age. He loved helping Asher with chores, following him around the cabin and imitating everything he did. "He is going to be a mountain man like his father," Grace said, watching Garrett carry kindling with great seriousness. "He can be anything he wants," Asher replied. "Mountain man, town person, whatever makes him happy. Same with Gemma. I want them to have choices, not feel trapped like I did." They will have choices, Grace promised, and they will have love. That is the most important thing. When Gemma was 18 months old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was older now, 28, and chasing after two small children took all her energy. Asher worried constantly, insisting she rest more, but Grace refused to be treated like an invalid. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him. "I will be fine. You said that last time and you were in labor for 6 hours. This time will be easier. Second births usually are. Or third births, I suppose." Asher did not look convinced, but he stopped hovering quite so much. The pregnancy progressed normally, and in the spring, Grace gave birth to their third child, another son they named Gabriel. He was the biggest of their children, nearly 10 pounds, and he came into the world with his eyes open, looking around with alert interest. "3 children," Asher said, holding Gabriel while Grace rested. Garrett and Gemma were with Beatrice in town, giving the new parents time to adjust. "We have 3 children. You wanted 3, Grace reminded him. "I think we are done now, though. 3 is a good number. 3 is perfect." As the children grew, so did their family's reputation in Watsonville. People who had once viewed Asher as a strange hermit now saw him as a devoted father and husband. Grace became known for her skills with medicine, having learned herbal remedies from books and from trial and error. People started coming to the cabin for help with injuries and illnesses, and Grace never turned anyone away. "You are a healer," Asher said one day after Grace had successfully treated a ranch hand's infected wound. "You have a gift for it." "I just pay attention and try things until something works. That is what healing is." Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Garrett learning to track and hunt with his father, Gemma learning to shoot and becoming a better marksman than her brother, much to his chagrin. Gabriel growing into a quiet, thoughtful child who loved books as much as Grace did. The cabin expanding as Asher added more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Grace and Asher grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. There were hard times, of course. Winters when food was scarce and they went to bed hungry. Illnesses that left them scared and helpless. Arguments over how to discipline the children or when to visit town. But they always worked through it, always chose each other, always remembered that they were partners in this life they had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Asher brought Grace back to the meadow. The children were old enough to be left with Beatrice for the day, and Grace and Asher spent the afternoon the way they had a decade earlier, lying in the wildflowers, talking about everything and nothing. "You ever regret it?" Asher asked. "Giving up your old life for this one?" "Never," Grace said firmly. "Not even once. That life was not really mine. It belonged to my father, to society, to everyone except me. This life is mine, our life. I chose it and I would choose it again 1,000 times. Even with all the hardships, the isolation, the hard work, the danger. Especially with those things. They make me strong. They remind me what I am capable of, and they make the good moments even better." She rolled over to face him, propping herself up on one elbow. "Do you regret marrying me, taking on a wife and 3 children when you could have stayed alone?" "Alone is not the same as free," Asher said. "I thought it was for a long time, but you taught me the difference. Being alone is just being by yourself. Being free is choosing the life you want, surrounded by the people you love. I am freer now than I ever was before." "Good answer." He pulled her down for a kiss, deep and slow and full of promise. After 10 years, Grace still felt that thrill when he touched her, still wanted him with an intensity that sometimes surprised her. They made love there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong, reaffirming the vows they had made a decade earlier. When Garrett turned 16, he announced he wanted to spend a year living in San Francisco. "I want to see the city," he said. "Experience something different before I decide what kind of life I want." Grace's first instinct was to say no, to keep her son safe in the mountains where she could protect him. But she remembered what Asher had said about giving their children choices, and she swallowed her fear. "All right," she said. "You can go, but you write to us every week, and if you need anything, you come home immediately." "I will, Ma, I promise." Asher helped Garrett prepare for the journey, teaching him about cities and how to navigate them. When the day came for Garrett to leave, Grace hugged him tight. "Be careful," she whispered. "And remember, no matter where you go or what you do, you always have a home here." "I know, Ma, I love you." "I love you too." Garrett came back after a year, full of stories about his time in the city. He had worked as a dockhand, had seen ships from around the world, had met people from dozens of different countries. But he was also ready to come home. "The city is amazing," he said, "but it is too crowded, too noisy. I miss the mountains. I miss the quiet." "I think I am a mountain man like Pa after all." Asher looked so proud Grace thought he might burst. "Then we will build you your own cabin," he said. "Near ours, but separate. A man needs his own space." They built Garrett's cabin together, father and son working side by side. When it was finished, Garrett moved in, and Grace had to accept that her oldest child was grown and gone, even though he was only a mile away. Gemma and Gabriel stayed closer to home, neither interested in seeing the wider world. Gemma announced at 18 that she wanted to be a doctor, a real doctor with training. "I have been watching Ma heal people my whole life," she said. "I want to learn to do it properly." It took months of letters and planning, but eventually Gemma was accepted to a medical program in Sacramento. She left with Grace's blessing and Asher's worry, promising to visit often. True to her word, she came home every few months, each time bringing new knowledge and skills. After 4 years, she returned permanently, setting up a small clinic in Watsonville where she could serve the community. Gabriel, always the quietest of their children, became a teacher. He started by tutoring the younger children in the area, then eventually took over when Mr. Amos retired. He married a quiet girl named Hannah, and they built a house in town, close to the school. Grace and Asher grew old together in the mountains they loved. Their hair turned gray and their bodies slowed, but their love remained as strong as ever. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the peaks, counting their blessings. "We did good," Asher said one evening. They were in their 60s now, grandparents several times over. Garrett had 3 children, Gemma had 2, and Gabriel had 4. The cabin was often full of visiting grandchildren, their laughter echoing through the mountains. "We did better than good," Grace replied. "We built a life full of love. What more could anyone ask for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Grace thought back to that cold January day 35 years ago when she had arrived in Watsonville with nothing but a carpet bag and desperation. She thought about the mountain man who had given her his coat without hesitation, who had seen her shivering and decided to help. That single act of kindness had changed her entire life. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For the coat. For that first moment when you saw a stranger in need and decided to help. Everything good in my life started with that decision." Asher squeezed her hand. "I think you have it backwards. Everything good in my life started when you decided to keep that coat, to find me again, to give us a chance. You could have just returned it and never thought about me again." "Impossible. I thought about you constantly." "Good, because I thought about you too. From the moment I saw you on that street corner, I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled and another answered. The mountains sang their evening song, and Grace felt at peace. She had left Boston a broken woman, running from scandal and grief. She had arrived in California expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, and she had found everything: love, purpose, family, home. She had found Asher and he had found her, and together they had built something beautiful. "I love you," she said, not for the first time and not for the last. She said it every day, multiple times a day, because she never wanted Asher to doubt how she felt. "I love you too," he replied, as he always did. "My Grace, my home, my heart." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, millions of them scattered across the black sky like diamonds. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted. The night air was cool but not cold, and Grace pulled Asher's arm around her shoulders, snuggling close. This was her life. These mountains, this man, this family they had created together. It was not the life she had planned or expected, but it was the life she was meant to live. Every moment of joy, every moment of hardship, every moment of love had led her here to this porch with this man under these stars. And she would not change a single thing.